I really don't need a write-up to introduce my good friend Ruben Uriarte, but sometimes I forget some of the many titles that he holds with MUFON. He tells me that he's gotten a new job with MUFON, and I say, does that mean you get a raise? And he laughs because MUFON is a completely voluntary organization. So yeah, 0 plus 0 is still 0, right? Now, but Ruben has been in the field of investigating UFOs, crop circles, and other paranormal happenings for over 30 years. Ruben holds a bachelor's degree in psychology and Latin American studies from Cal State University at Hayward. And for those of you not familiar with the geography of California, Hayward is in the San Francisco Bay Area. And Hayward also sits right on top of one of the world's most notorious earthquake faults. I'm sorry, Ruben, I know this makes you a little nervous. The Hayward Fault. And so I was staying in Ruben suggested that I stay at this hotel in Hayward a couple of weeks ago when they had a 4.0 magnitude earthquake at 2 a.m. that shook my hotel bed. And that was the first one I've ever experienced in my life, and thank you, Ruben, for that experience. He wanted me to have the full Bay Area experience. But I did like the fact that it didn't get above 70 degrees, and this was mid-July, the whole time I was there, San Francisco area, so that part was wonderful. I told my wife, let's move to California. She said, I don't like earthquakes. I'd rather bake than shake, is the way she put it. So we're in the hot Rio Grande Valley, Ruben, probably for a while, yeah. Ruben has been a member of MUFON as a field investigator, state director for Northern California, and he's the Deputy Director of Investigations and International Affairs. I bet you got a big raise.
For the big time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Doubled your salary? Yeah.
Exactly, double my time.
Ruben has been involved with a large network of paranormal research organizations. For example, he was a state coordinator for crop circle phenomena research. Crop circles have always fascinated me, and Ruben, maybe you could just speak briefly about it at some point. I'm not saying you have to, I'm just saying that it fascinates me. And the movie Signs with Mel Gibson, any of y'all remember that? Yeah. One of my favorite UFO related movies, and it has the crop circles that the ETs were making. Ruben was a former research director for Beyond Boundaries, a fascinating group that would take people to various paranormal hotspots all over the country. So you got a lot of free travel out of that.
Oh,
right?
sure.
He went to look at crop circles in the UK, for example, and other paranormal hotspots.
Yeah. There's a tour group based here in Texas.
And they were based, the tour group was based here in Texas, up near Stephenville. I forget the name.
Granbury.
He's also a member of the Organization for Paranormal and Support Understanding. You know, a lot of people that have a paranormal experience don't know how to cope with the after effects, and Ruben's group is involved in helping people cope. And if you watch UFO TV on Discovery Channel, History Channel, etc., you'll eventually see Ruben, because he's been on many, many shows. I call him the movie star, just for short. And I have had the pleasure of working with Ruben on 8 different book projects that we've written together and with other researchers. So our first book together in 2007 was Mexico's Roswell, and we've been going out all over the country speaking, and in Mexico, speaking about Mexico's Roswell, which is one of the cases that he's about to talk about. So everybody, let's welcome from California, Ruben.
Thank you. How many of you folks saw San Andreas, the earthquake movie? Well, hopefully we won't have one here, right? No,
Not here.
Yeah. Well, my talk for today is UFO crashes, or UFO crash retrievals on the Texas-Mexico border. And both Noe and I have been researching some very important events that have happened along the border here. As Noe had mentioned, I am the Northern California State Director, and I also have another title where I work closely with other international chapters. We have UFO MUFON in other countries as well. We do have a website, MUFON.com, and Northern California MUFON.com. And here's our team here, Noe and myself, over in the little town of Coyame, which is about 40 miles south of Presidio. And we've been there several times, and also along the border on our research. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to go back because, as you know, the situation in Mexico is not as is a little dangerous, right? And so we've had to rely a lot on our friends from Mexico, our other investigators there. We share information, so this is what it's become. We've been able to share in an endeavor on both sides of the border with our friends. And what we have here is UFOs have no borders. That's been our slogan, because what we're finding out is that it doesn't matter what man-made border there is. These objects are flying over all different countries and impacting folks in many different ways individually, and as you've been hearing, it perhaps has been impacting our society for many, many years. And if you look at the border here, it's approximately 2,000 miles, right? From Tijuana all the way down to Matamoros, or from San Diego all the way down to Brownsville. Yeah, so it's a long border, but our concentration has been primarily along the Texas-Mexico border. And that's just a shot of me when I was with Noe. We've traveled in Coyame, and they have a vast cave system there, La Grutas. So there's a lot going on in that little town and the surrounding area. I believe it's about 2-3 hour drive from Chihuahua, the major city. So it's right there as you're heading toward the border. 2 hour drive, yes. So we've been talking a lot about television, history, movies, and there's one of our favorite programs called The Twilight Zone, and taken from this great gentleman. And now, how come I can forget his name? Rod Serling. How can I forget his name? Shame on me. Anyway, he states that this highway leads to the shadow tip of reality. You're on a trip route to the land of the different, the bizarre and inexplainable. Go as far as you like on this road. Ladies and gentlemen, next stop, the UFO border zone. There's a picture of me standing by a sign. It says UFOborderzone.com. And we've worked very closely with a number of city officials. As I stated a lot earlier, both Noe has worked very hard with a lot of the city officials along some of the major cities in trying to promote the border zone festivals. And so this is why we have this festival today, is because of the great work that a number of people have done in trying to bring the truth of what's going on in our skies and on both sides of the border. So there's been a lot going on in terms of the crashes. Going back, there was a magazine called the Outstanding Science Fiction Magazine from September 1958. And on the cover that was designed by Mr. Martinez, he depicted a UFO crash in a small, isolated Mexican village. And as you can see, there are 2 survivors, and one underneath is deceased. And the spectators are a priest and several villagers. Now, stay with that theme, a small, isolated Mexican village, because we're going to see that and depicted in other types of media and other types of programs. And here's one, a famous one, called The Twilight Zone TV show. In 1962, The Gift. You must have known something, yeah. amazing that, and I'm going to go why do we share this segment with you? How many remember Twilight Zone? Ah, yes. The golden years, right? The Gift. That's one of our favorites. But something really interesting. Again, let's just go over it real quickly what Rod Serling said. The place is Mexico, just across the Texas border, a mountain village held back in time by its remoteness and suddenly intruded upon by the 20th century. And this is Pedro, 9 years old, a lonely, rootless little boy who will soon make the acquaintance of a traveler from a distant place. We are at present 40 miles from the Rio Grande, but any place and all places can be the Twilight Zone. So in 1962, this is when it was released. Coincidentally, something did happen. In Coyame, Chihuahua, it's a small Mexican town. Again, remember going back, a Mexican village? Population 710 people approximately. It's located about 40 miles from the Rio Grande, near the border town of Presidio, Texas. The Midtown, Texas town bears the name of a famous UFO incident, a reported mid-air collision between an airplane and a UFO on August 25th, 1974. So we're going on close to 41 years. Now, we're coming up on the anniversary next week, or more. And just to go very quickly about the event, and then we'll show you a segment out of the History Channel. A strange object was traveling at 2,000 miles per hour and it crashed into a small plane that was headed south to Mexico City, causing both aircraft to fall to the Chihuahua Desert below. The crash ignited into a desperate race between two governments to recover the crashed UFO. And this case is known as Mexico's Roswell, and it's been featured in several television documentaries and into two books by both Mr. Noé Torres and myself, titled Mexico's Roswell and the Coyame Incident. And these are our two books that we've written. The closest Texas city to the Coyame UFO crash is Presidio, Texas, again 40 miles away. So like you said, Noe, Rod Serling must have known something, right? Presidio celebrates the event every October with the Border Zone International UFO Festival, just like here in Edinburg. We also have an event in Presidio. And this is coming up in October, I believe, right? This is last year's t-shirt, where it shows a flying saucer, a flying sombrero flying over Pancho Villa, right? Pretty cool. And what's also interesting that the town of Presidio and its surrounding has also attracted some very interesting movies. Back in 1970, there was a movie film titled The Adronymous Strain. How many of you folks might remember that movie? Now it gets even more interesting. It was written by Robert Weiss, or he was directed by Robert Weiss, and he directed the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still in 1951. The Sound of Music, how many of you remember that? 1965. And Star Trek, the motion picture in 1979. He produced this based on the book that was written by Michael Crichton back in '69, The Adronymous Strain. And he filmed this movie north of Presidio, in an area known as close to the Chinati Mountains, about 18 miles north of Presidio, in a little town called Shafter. And again, the movie was released in '71, and the plot's very interesting because it talked about two crew members of the U.S. government's Project Scoop. They investigate the town of Piedmont, New Mexico, to retrieve the Scoop 7 satellite. They found townspeople dead in the streets, and then they died themselves while reporting back to Scoop Mission Control. Suspecting the satellite may have brought back an extraterrestrial pathogen, Scoop Mission Control activates an elite scientific team that had previously recruited for just this type of emergency. So remember the plot, how this, and it relates to the crash in Coyame in 1974, because coincidentally, there are some odd similarities between the plot of the Adronymous Strain and what happened in Mexico Roswell, where the UFO crashed about 40 miles northwest of Presidio. The crash reportedly released a toxic substance into the surrounding environment that killed a search and rescue team of Mexican soldiers. An elite military team from Fort Bliss, Texas was flown to the crash site into Mexico to retrieve the downed flying saucer. Very interesting. And then as we started getting into the research, we were really amazed with some of the findings. In the Chihuahuan Desert is the largest North American desert, and it's very large. It extends into Arizona, southern New Mexico, Texas, all the way down to the states of Zacatecas and San Luis Potosí and Mexico. It's even larger than the state of California. Now it gets more interesting. We found in that area a number of crashes that have occurred. And the one I'll be focusing today will be the 1974 Coyame crash, but we also had another UFO crash near Del Rio in 1955, and of course the famous Roswell UFO crash incident up there in New Mexico. Interesting. Now it gets even more interesting. We have found, again, near Langtree area, 1955 near Del Rio, but we also had two other incidences. Los Indios, Texas, Guerrero, Mexico in 1950, and of course in Laredo, July 7, 1948. So you're probably asking, why so many crashes? What's going on in our borders? Well, so we're starting to go through some documents, and there's one called the briefing document, the Eisenhower briefing document. It says here, on October 6, December 1950, a second object, probably of similar origin, impacted the Earth at high speed in the Indio Guerrero area of Texas, Mexican border, after following a long trajectory through the atmosphere. By the time a search and rescue team arrived, what remained of the object had been almost totally incinerated. Such material as could be recovered was transported to the AEC Atomic Energy Commission facility at Sandia, New Mexico for study. So this was, again, in December of 1950. Then comes another interesting memo that shows of March 1950, and this was directed to Hoover, who was in charge of he was the director for FBI. And it states, and it was blocked out, it says, following information was furnished to SA, which stands for Special Agent. An investigator for the Air Force stated that 3 so-called flying saucers had been recovered in New Mexico. They were described as being circular in shape with raised centers, approximately 50 feet in diameter. Each one was occupied by 3 bodies of human shape, but only 3 feet tall, dressed in metallic cloth of very fine texture. Each body was bandaged in a manner similar to the blackout suits used by speed flyers or that of pilots. According to Mr. Blank, this was rubbed out informant, the saucers were found in New Mexico due to the fact that the government has a very high-powered radar set up in the area, and it is believed that the radar interferes with the controlling mechanisms of the saucers. Interesting. No further evaluation was attempted by Special Agent concerning the above. Well, coincidentally, several years later, there was another movie that came out of Hollywood called Earth versus the Flying Saucers, where it shows that there is this beam or this radar beam that disrupted the flight patterns of these saucers and causing them to crash. That's so interesting how we found the memo, and then several years later, here's another Hollywood movie depicting that. So it gets very interesting in our research. We find that on May 29, 1947 and October 12, 1947, there was these V-2 rocket tests that were taking place near White Sands, New Mexico and Fort Bliss. And these missiles happened to crash into Mexico near Juarez. Now we had another event that happened on September 12th of '67 where another Pershing missile crashed into the Mexican border, near the Mexican border. And then another event that happened July 11th of 1970 near an Athena missile. So we had 4 different missile events where they have crashed into the Mexican border, and every time this happened we had U.S. military going into with a permission to go in and retrieve the parts and that, And of course, this was becoming very embarrassing. So as I stated before, well, Noe and I had worked on a number of books on the different events. The Other Roswell, which depicted 1955, and Fallen Angel, which is the Laredo UFO crash, and of course our 2 books on the Coyame incident. We've also worked on other books, Aliens in the Forest, and that deals with the alien encounter, and also UFOs over Mexico, encounters with unidentified aerial phenomena, where we worked with 2 investigators from Mexico, Carlos Guzman and Alfonso Salazar. We basically did an English version of the book, and plus we updated it, had our own research. So that's really interesting, and those books are also available online. Now we're going to go into the Coyame incident, the UFO crash near Presidio, Texas. Again, both Noah and I have been working on this, and we're still investigating this case because we always are getting new information. So I'm going to share with you a little segment that was aired on the History Channel about Mexico's Roswell, and it gives you the overview. Well, what he says, there's no evidence to prove it, which is part of the reason why both Noe and I have been working very hard on this with another team. And the way we found out about this was a report called the Deneb report. Deneb standing for, Deneb is a star system. I thought it was an acronym, but it turned out that the term Deneb was a document that was very detailed. I mean, all this information that was shown here on the History Channel was based on that report. And that report was sent out anonymously to a number of people, some prominent UFO researchers as well, back in 1992. So when Noe and I started looking at this document, it really described the area of West Texas, Big Bend, or South, that whole, not Big Bend, is it? Yes, Big Bend, and that whole area. So it went into much detail, and then we thought there must be some truth here, and we took it to a number of other people, and they said, no, it seemed it was written by a number of military people. And of course, we've had, this is one of the prominent UFO researchers at the time, and he received a report and said that, he said, it's my judgment there seems to be a legitimacy to the 1974 Chihuahua crash report, and that he had received this from another prominent researcher, Elaine Douglas, back in Washington, who was running a program called Operation Right to Know, and who was coordinating a picket march in Washington, D.C. in July 1993, receiving it in the mail in the summer of 1993, postmarked Santa Ana, California. She said it came probably as a result of publicity following the march, and someone was trying to get in touch with her, and they forwarded this document. So let's look here at the area of the crash site. It happened again 40 miles south of Presidio, and it happened in the municipality of Coyame, which is right across from Candelaria, Texas. This is where the route where the helicopters flew into the crash site to recover the downed UFO, and this is what an aerial view of that area in Chihuahua. And as it's stated that the UFO was approximately 16 feet 5 inches in diameter, and was 5 feet in height. So it was a small craft. Again, it stated that there were no bodies that were found. This is again based on the report from Deneb. And of course, during that time, we did have U.S. surveillance spy satellites. We have some information here during that particular time of between 1971 and 86. There was a America's Eye in the sky. We used these satellites, and the fact that it was possible that they again were retrieving the pictures of the downed UFO. In addition to that, if you see on the upper left hand, you'll see Regional Military Complex, the White Sands Missile Test Range, the UH-1 helicopters that were used in the operation, and the possibility of a large Sikorsky Super Stallion helicopter, or perhaps a Boeing CH-47 that were used to retrieve the object. Now it gets a little more bizarre, because this is the additional evidence that we've been receiving. Some of it requires a lot more investigation. But recently, about a year and a half ago, we received this information we have a Wikipedia that describes about the Mexico's Roswell event. Well, someone went into that and changed it and started adding some names. And we started looking at it, and I said, Noe, did you update this? I said, this is different. And we started researching it, and we found that someone had placed this information. It said a short distance from the wreckage was also an olive green Jeep belonging to the Mexican military and containing the bodies of 4 soldiers. The 4 Mexican soldiers were Captain Rogelio Argüelles Gonzalez with the serial number, Sergeant Tifolio Margarito Puebla with his serial number, Corporal Jose Trinidad Meraz, and Corporal Ricardo Velasquez. Their bodies were displayed signs of death by asphyxiation. They were all in possession of their firearms, but show no evidence in attempting to use them. Strange. But anyway, it also gave the names of the American military that were involved in the operation. So this is one thing that we're looking at to see if we could track down the names. Then, of course, we also, I'm going to shoot ahead. We also received testimony from a teacher named Johnny Chambers, who both her and her son remember seeing a strange, seeing a large cloud, an explosion behind the mountains near Calendaria. And the son described it as a huge fireball. And again, this was happened right around 1974, which coincides perhaps with the report of where they took the remains of the plane and the bodies of the soldiers, and they had to possibly quarantine. Because remember the possible theory that it could have been the fact that there might have been a biological agent or a virus that was being released. And the reason why we suspect that is that the crash debris was taken to Atlanta, Georgia. That was in the report. And what's in Atlanta, Georgia? Well, it happens to be the center of disease control. So there might be a connection there. Again, we had other interesting testimony of a police officer named Tony Ramirez, who says that at age 10, he remembers seeing a strange creature there in Coyame in the cornfield in 1974, right around the same time of the crash. Also, later, we had some other additional information that was given to us by our Mexican investigators, that there were some meetings going on with the president of that time, with the president, Luis Echeverria, and with Gerald Ford. But also, what's also interesting is that, and I'm going to end it here, I mentioned the small flying saucer. We had another incident that happened on May 3rd, 1975, where Carlos de los Santos was flying a Piper Aztec 24 airplane, and there were 3 small flying discs that surrounded his plane during his flight. And how do we know that? Because he actually called the Mexican air traffic controllers in Mexico and said that he had no control of his airplane, and he was given this, and it was recorded. So I'm going to play the recording very quickly here. Okay, I'm going to translate that very quickly. He's basically calling Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. He has 3 unidentifying objects surrounding his airplane. He has no control of his airplane. And we have the entire testimony of this for 18 minutes of him dealing with this encounter. So going back to 1974 to the Coyame, where we had a small disc that collided with the airplane, 8 months later we had this event here, which correlates with our research. So because of the short time, I'm going to go ahead and end it here. And we have my good friend here, Noah Torres, is going to be talking to you about Area 51. So we're going to take about a 10-minute break there.
3:30 we'll start.
3:30 we'll start, folks. So go ahead and relax, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Ruben.